All right.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the May 14th, 2024 Zoning Review Committee meeting. We are going to discuss the sign bylaw this evening, and I think without further ado, we'll turn things right over to Bob Mitchell.
Okay, well, thanks, Jazz. Good evening, everyone. So you have two documents. One is a draft of the new table format, and that the table draft you have includes all of the business and industrial districts. The residential districts, if this format is agreed to, the residential districts is a much simpler table to put together, so we wanted to start with here. And then the second document is the a memo to you about sign issues. So one of the things that always happens, every single town I work in, when I'm working with a sign bylaw that is currently in text, in paragraphs, in sentences, kind of spread over, disorganized kind of way, and you put that together into a table format, into a, grouping things by like topics, by districts, whatnot. Things start jumping off the page, and some of those things are good. You go, oh, well, this makes sense, and you can compare one district to the other because you just look right across the rows from the on the table. You don't have to try to compare pages against pages. But one of the other things that always happens is questions come up, inconsistent issues come up, inconsistent language, because the language has never been right next to each other before, and now it is, and you go, wait a minute, they're using different terms for the same thing. Things that seem to be missing, language that I don't know what it means, and sometimes it turns out nobody knows what it means, and so that's one of the questions for tonight. Maybe some of this all of you met. So Eric and I, Eric, the planner, town planner, Eric, have been working back and forth over the last few weeks, massaging all of this to get it to the point where he was happy with it, and where I was, fine with it and whatnot. I did go over this list with Eric. He had some thoughts about some of these questions and some of these issues, but he really wasn't sure, and he didn't know the history of some of this. So, we're going to ask the experts who have been around for a while on this meeting. So I think it would be, I don't know, Chaz, do you have a preference if we go through the list first or go through the table first?
I do not have a preference. Do you think it would be more helpful to run through the table real quick, and then does that answer some of the questions that are?
Yeah, sure. Why don't we do that?
Okay.
So there were some constraints here. One of which we talked about last time, which is everybody wanted to try to keep this in a portrait format and not go to a landscape format. So we had to get a lot of information squeezed into a table in a portrait format. Your sign bylaw, like many sign bylaws, has some unique things about it, and somewhat, sort of cascading. The signs allowed here are also allowed there, and sounds allowed there are also allowed here, and whatnot. And you have a lot of what we call standards requirements about the signs, in addition to the usual, which is what are the size of the signs, what's the location, what's the height, and whatnot. So just starting on page 1, oh, wait a minute, I got the wrong draft in front of me. This is the right one. So as I said, this table is just for the business and industrial districts, and they are grouped by, as you can see at the top, B1, B2, B3, B4, I1. So you have all the districts right next to each other. The other grouping, there's a number of different groupings, but the other grouping is to try to group like sign types. So as you'll see, permanent signs attached. So the first grouping is different kinds of attached signs. Permanent signs. You have permanent signs in your bylaw and you have temporary signs requirements. They're mixed and matched in your current, the way it's laid out now in the current text. So we created in the table, all of the permanent signs are going to be listed first, and then after that, temporary signs will be listed second. And so you can see the little permanent signs attached. So attached is the first permanent sign you have. And then down the left side where it says
Excuse me,
requirements,
is the table being shared right now? I don't think so. I see any table.
I don't have, I'm not sharing, I'm not screen
Oh, okay.
sharing. Do you have the table, Joe?
I'm
We
sure it's
emailed
on
to
the,
everybody, but,
there we go.
oh, okay.
Thank you, Colin.
Thanks, Colin. So as you can see, you've got the headings with the business and industrial districts across the top. You have some general sign requirements, which are right on the top about signs in the residential districts are also allowed in the business and industrial districts. And, setback from the street. Then you have the kind of sign, first permanent signs, and then the first one there is attached. And then down on the left side, you have what the requirements are. And this left side, as you will see as we go through this table, it's the same requirements. The number of signs allowed, the maximum size, the location, the standards that are required, what the permit requirement, and what the permit requirements are. So that repeats itself for each category of signs. So there's a
So
standardization.
just a question of clarification.
Sure.
If I may, on the location, first of all, the permanent sign, let's say B1 or any of them, you're allowed one. It says number of signs is one.
Yes,
Then under standards, it says oriented to each street on which the premises have frontage.
right.
So that means one sign for each street on which the premises have frontage?
Well, that's a good question, Joe. Um, and, so, so that's one of the items on the list. So my question was, well, does that mean, like you just said, does that mean one sign for that building attached? Or does that mean one sign per business that's in that building that's attached to the wall? Because, if you have a little, just for example, a little strip commercial that has 3 buildings facing the street, they all, if I drive around your town, they all have an attached sign to the wall, so it's not clear there, but it seems like it's interpreted that it's one per business. But that's one of the questions that is posed for you, all of you.
Well, that's one question, the number of businesses per location or address. But my other question was on the building is on a corner, a direct corner, and it has 2 walls, one wall on each street. Is it allowed double the number of signs, one on each
There's
street?
no language in your bylaw that does that now.
Okay. And we had an instance not too long ago where it wasn't directly on the street. It was I'm going to say it was 2 lots, one lot away from the street that was perpendicular. And they came in for a variance so that they could have a sign on that side of the building also. So they were on the main street. So they had a sign on the main street.
Okay,
And then on one side of the building, one lot away was another major street, and they wanted a sign on that side also to
I
catch
see.
traffic on
But
both thoroughfares.
they weren't, that their property was not on that major street. It was one lot away from the major street, but they still want a sign facing that major street.
Mhm.
I understand that correctly?
Yes.
So that's a good point. Many towns do have specific language for corner lots where the frontage is on both, two streets. And sometimes they get an extra sign on the side, what they refer to as a side street. And sometimes that's a smaller sign, but there is language like that. I actually don't think I've ever seen language for side signs a lot away from a street before, so that's a new one for me, Joe.
Well, we also have one that's on a main thoroughfare. And they have one sign on the main thoroughfare, but adjacent to the 90-degree side of the building, they're on a private way. And they wanted a sign on that. So that was on their parking lot side, on the private way side, which functions as access to multiple businesses in a location. But the main thoroughfare, they wanted a sign there. That particular case went through because the preceding tenant or owner of that building or tenant of that building was granted the two signs, and they were kitty corner at 90 degrees. And so we kept the same zoning approval of those two signs. So we're talking about a private thoroughfare versus a public right of way, and a public right of way at a 90-degree angle.
So the language you have in your bylaw, and this is actually one of the inconsistent places for language. So in some places, it says oriented to the street on which the premises have frontage. And which is, if you look under B1, the first bullet point for standards, it says oriented to the street on which the premises have frontage. And then if you look over under I1, on the second bullet, it says oriented to each street on which the premises has access. Well, frontage and access are two different things. So that's really confusing, and I don't know how that's been interpreted by the town, but they could, they could have their access over their frontage, but they also could have their access someplace different than their frontage. And that seems to me to be something that needs to be clarified. So, how many is it one per business? Is there signs allowed for street corner, on the two sides on a street corner? They're allowed these other kind of unique circumstances, although this language only says street, it doesn't say public street. So that might cover you for, private streets. But, the uniqueness of that one lot over, that's a really unique circumstance. So there's three issues right there that some direction would be needed, so we could, finish this up. So you can see the standards, and then, the permit requirements.
One thing on that, if we're still on that first page, 7.2I, is to distinguish between multiple businesses at one location. Right now, we're sort of geared to one business, one building. They're going to have a sign of a certain size. If we have a multi-unit or multi-business in one building, how is that going to be handled for all the separate businesses?
Well, the third category, so on page 3, so you have attached signs, limited access highway, you have freestanding sign, you have freestanding single business on a lot, you have freestanding retail complex of 50,000 square feet or more, and then you have freestanding shopping mall And then after that, the next category is multiple business signs. And you
Okay.
already have that in your bylaw, so it's covered in your bylaw. That's at the bottom of page 3, top of page 4. So that's a category that is covered in, it's, but again, it just says one. And I have to believe that it's interpreted one per business, if it's for multiple businesses, not just one for the building. So again, that needs.
And that's what we're doing now, isn't it, Joe? I mean, any retail plaza, every business has its own sign on the out front,
Right,
so. So I think we're covered there.
Well, we have one business that had multiple licensees in one building. And they wanted a lit sign for each business, and I believe they had 4. So if you interpret the number of signs per business, it would be, you would allow up to 80% of the wall area if it's an attached sign. Which I don't know if that works out.
Well, Bob, getting back to
What
the,
I'm saying is, yeah, we have to have a special case where there are multiple businesses per one location, and how we're gonna define what their rights would be in adding a sign, let's say per license. Maybe it's a condition of their agreement or their license agreement that they have to have external signs. So we have to be somewhat accommodating, otherwise, we're not gonna attract those businesses. But if a business has one building and they have multiple, let's say multiple dealerships for certain items, we want to allow them a certain amount of wall area for each sign for each business. But our intent is not to have, I would say, over 50% of the wall space taken up, right?
okay,
well, these are all great questions, and, Eric and I discussed some of this, but my question is always, well, how would, when I read things that I go, well, I'm not sure how this would be interpreted. And, is it one per business? And if it's one per business, do they all get 20% of the wall? Or is there, all the great questions you're asking, Joe, these are the things that kind of need clarifying in the bylaw. So,
so, Joe, just so I understand, so if we're talking about a car dealership that has multiple lines, say it's Ford, Chevy, Mazda, whatever. We're talking about the name of the dealership, Joe's dealership, and then signs for each one of those individual car lines. Is that sort of what we're getting
That
at?
would be a good example, yes.
Okay, all right. And do we accommodate that anywhere, Bob, in our current bylaws here? I didn't see anything like that, but
That has come up that is a real life case that has come up in the past. So I'm giving you real life examples of the ones that, hopefully Bob, you're taking notes on these. These are some of the ones that we've struggled with, in the past.
sorry, I accidentally hit the mute, sorry. But, so like a simple issue here is what, Joe, you just raised on multiple business signs. If they all get 20% of the wall area, or if they all get 25 square feet of a freestanding sign, is there a total maximum for that building or that site? 50% of the wall area, or no freestanding sign larger than whatever, 50 square feet or 75 square feet, and then they get, they divvy up that 75 square feet among 3 or 4 businesses or whatever. So those are the kinds of those are actually kind of policy issues, how many and how big and how much.
Well, could we have total sign area to be a certain amount of the building? So it couldn't exceed 50%, for example?
That's pretty common, that kind of a, no, up to, but not exceeding, 50% of the wall space or up to whatever, 75 or 50 square foot, freestanding sign, or up to and not exceeding, X amount per individual sign or something like that. Those are pretty common.
So are you looking for an answer right now on that,
No,
Bob?
no, I'm just giving real world examples so that we can all take note as to maybe the direction of how to fine tune some of these categories on the matrix that we have. I have a larger issue coming up a little later on that you'll all want to stay tuned for.
So aside from, if I could just back up a little bit, aside, at least to this point, aside from some of the questions and issues and clarifications that needed, is the basic structure of the table okay with you? With the headings across the top, the signs types down the left side, organized by type together, and then the requirements down the left side, so you can compare the standards against each zone.
I like that a lot. Yep.
Agreed. Yep, I do too,
Okay.
Bob.
Yeah, the only thing I would say, I forget whether we did it in the other ones. The top of each page, let's make sure that we've got, the headers
Yes,
that are there, because sometimes when it paginates,
yes,
we lose some of that stuff.
yeah, there's a couple of them that are off by 1 or 2 rows, but that will all be fixed.
And I guess the other one, Bob, would be that if each column is the same, so that in many of these zones, the first couple of lines are the exact same all the way across. And I'm looking at like the last page, for example, the third one across, which I think is general business. It's the exact same language, but 2 or 3 of them are longer than the other 2. And I think that's just because of the size of the columns or something.
I'm sorry, Chaz, where are you looking?
So I'm looking at the last page where temporary signs on page 5.
Let me,
Okay, so you can see where the first 2, the second line has sales, rental, or lease. And then by the time you get to the third column, it's still sales, rental, but lease somehow gets knocked down to the next line. And it kind of throws all the language off all the way down till you get to the end, where the last word is a I mean, it's the exact same language. It's just that it doesn't fit into the same square.
oh, right, yeah. Yeah,
So if you could just do something to fix that, I think it just reads easier. That's all to me. Most of them are fine, but every now and then you hit one of them.
yeah, trying to jiggle the columns
Yep.
to fit.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
gonna be like
without,
one letter
words.
off or something.
Yeah, so some of the words, some of these columns are so narrow, some of the words, like the word requirement, you had to make the column just a little wider. Otherwise, it would be require M and then NT at on the
Yeah.
next line, that kind of stuff. So it, just I'm
If
still
we
working-
don't-
trying to figure that out, not figure
if
it
we-
out, trying to make it.
If we don't see that many changes per category, we on the green border, we could probably say it's R1, R2, R3 and inclusive of all the zones, and just have one vertical column since they're all identical. That would make it a little easier to read too.
That's good, that's an idea, yeah, just,
And are we firm on keeping this portrait versus landscape?
Yeah, if we went landscape, it'd probably be easier to get fit everything in.
But then people, I don't know how people use it, so it's I don't know like what most towns do. We're trying to make it easy for people to understand, and definitely trying to fit the 6 columns here in portrait is tough from a real estate standpoint. Doesn't sound like anybody has much of a a preference either way.
most towns try to keep it portrait for a couple of reasons. I've seen, some towns, have kind of a screwy bylaw because they have some of it landscape and some of it portrait, and you kind of have to shift, even when you're looking at a digital, you kind of have to shift it 2/3 one way or a quarter this way to get it to show up the right way. And then printing it, sometimes it works where it prints landscape and portrait. And then I've seen problems where it prints the landscape as a portrait, which cuts off part of the landscape language. And I mean, I don't know if there's any correct answer, but
Well, all the rest of our bylaws are all done in portraits, so I think maybe we should try and stick with that format all the way through.
Works for me.
okay.
I like consistency, and at least people know when
Yeah.
they're looking at it. And there's different ways that we can deal with trying to fit all the language on there and keeping it legible and easy to find.
All right,
Okay,
so your main question, Bob, was do we like the format and the way it's set up with permanent signs first and temporary signs and number of signs and locations and size and all that? And I say yes, I love it. So that's my input.
okay, right. Well, that's a good, I thank you for that, because then we can just focus on the details going forward, and I can start working on the other parts of the bylaw, the sign bylaw as well. Um, so, um, so after attached signs, the next one on page 2 is, so you have kind of some interesting subcategories. You have attached signs, but then you have attached signs on a limited access highway. And it's kind of a broad umbrella provision, because the select board can issue a special permit across all of the business and industrial districts for a bigger sign, or an additional sign if you're near a highway. So I had to squeeze that in there somewhere. And then from there, you move to freestanding signs. And you have 4 separate categories of freestanding signs. You have just freestanding signs, which interestingly only applies to the industrial district. This is on page 2 now. Let me see. Yeah, and then the major section for freestanding signs is single business on a lot, which makes sense. So you start with just one business on a lot, and then you go to retail complex of 50,000 square feet or more with 3 or more businesses, and logically the signs get bigger. And then, as you can see down on the left side, you go to the third category, which is the shopping center sign, which the sign gets even bigger. And those are only allowed in the B3 and B4 districts and not B1, B2. So any place where you see gray in the rows or columns, there's no provision for that particular sign in that district.
So if we go back to page 2, permanent signs freestanding, single business on a lot, office professional business district, B2, do we have nothing in there? Is that because we have nothing, or is that,
For standards,
yeah,
you have nothing in there.
so don't we need something in there?
Well, so, oh, good question, good question. I did have a conversation with Eric about this, and, so as you can see, for B1, B3, and B4, the zoning board has the power to, grant a bigger sign if it's not incongruous with the district itself, but not for the B2 district. And Eric thought that that was deliberate when the B2 district was adopted, because it was a very limited district with limited uses, and it was intended, around your town center or near your town center. And it had limited number of uses, and the feeling was that it should be, and this, I'm not sure he used these words, just, sort of a low-key business district with smaller businesses, more discreet signage, and that, the feeling was that the language in the other ones about the zoning board having power to increase the sign should not apply in this district because of the distinctiveness of the district. But that's, again, that's a policy decision of the town, but that's where it stands now.
Joe, how do you feel about that one?
I don't know.
Well, I kind of, I'm sort of really relying on you and Adriana, because this all falls in your lap.
Yeah,
And
the smaller signs for smaller businesses like the center, to keep the character of the center of the town. I think that's what they were talking about.
But should we have some kind of language in there that would just help those
Oh,
businesses?
definitely we should have something else in there. Yep.
Okay,
Yeah, because if anything is rezoned outside of the center of town, then there should be a standard.
but we do have B2 outside of the center of town. So some sort of guidance in there for whoever,
Mm-hmm.
and we can maybe set up a separate, rule for the center of town. So those are my thoughts.
So my question would be, do you want to just take the existing language from B1, B3, and B4 and move it in here, or do you want to have something less intense, something that you allow 25 square feet now and 8 feet above the ground level? Do you want to move those to 50 square feet and 25 feet high, or do you want to have something in between?
Well, I think if we're looking at the center of town and want to keep the sign small, maybe there should be two definitions. One for the center of town, which would maybe be 12 square feet. And then outside of the center of town, sure, we can mimic B1 and B3.
I'm afraid you can't do that.
Okay,
The state statute has what's known as the uniformity clause. And regulations in a particular zoning district have to be uniform across all properties in that zoning district.
No spot zoning.
Yeah, it's not really spot zoning, but you're right, it's not, you can't
Similar.
have sort of,
Yep.
the B2 district in town center have one set of regs for signs, and the B2 district in the other part of town have a separate set of regs for signs. Or anything else, you know, setbacks or building height or whatever. The regs have to be uniform across the district.
So maybe that's why it was left blank then.
Could be. I don't know.
Joe and Adriana, have you run into anything like this before in B2? Not yet.
No.
I don't recall anything when I was on the board either.
Yeah, there's only a few spots in the center of town that would get signage. I'm thinking the buildings behind, not the community that where we rented out the old town hall. That could have some signage.
Yep, and those businesses all have signs. And I would certainly say they're, you know, they're bigger than 12, but I don't think they're 25. I'd have to go look at them again, of course, but yeah, that's an interesting dilemma.
So I'll give you my big concern right now.
Fire away.
So we need another section in green. So the title should be something like permanent signs, freestanding, abutting limited access, high-speed highways or secondary roads, electronic or standard. These are the electronic billboard type signs. Currently, on our last meeting, we just okayed a variance for, I guess it was for setbacks and special permit for another electronic billboard located adjacent to Route 3. That will bring to our total one standard billboard and 2 electronic. Luckily, the placement of this second electronic board is not within a line of sight of the previous electronic billboard. They're both located on the southbound side of Route 3. So we have to address the issue of how many, where they should be located, where they can be located, if we can. A cap, if we can. I can see that actually the wording so that somebody may want to do that on Middlesex at some point, right? So we should get ahead of the curve and address that also. So anything on Route 3 and on major thoroughfare.
What is a major thoroughfare?
What is a major thoroughfare? It would be
Yeah.
a state highway.
So right now, you have fairly new language for electronic message centers. It was only adopted, what, a year or two ago? No more than 2 years ago. In the current language of the bylaw. It is only allowed for educational uses and municipal uses in all zoning districts. You may recall this, right?
That was the school signage.
Right.
This is commercial.
I understand, but at that time, the town didn't want to add commercial to this electronic message center.
Yeah, they wanted to get through this. There was a particular case for a school who wanted to do something, and we hurried along a certain portion of the law to accommodate them for their small signage for their school and made it very specific for their electronic board. That did not address the commercial signboards at all, and it wasn't intended to.
Yeah, I think we kind of pushed that one in and we wanted to make sure that we addressed that whole category when we were looking at the sign bylaws the way we are now.
I will tell you, we can do that. That is a huge issue in terms of, because that is a as you know, as you drive around, you can see these all over, and this is one of the aspects of sign regulation that is changing because technology is changing so fast as to what an electronic sign is, and you know, how bright it is, and how often it changes, and is it, you know, static, or does it change from static to static, or does it evolve from, you know, one video to another, or video is allowed? I mean, it's gonna be a lot of questions that,
Even the type of
Mm.
content that can be advertised,
excuse me,
even the type of content that can be advertised.
even the type of content, yeah, because you have more control over the content for commercial signs than you do for, you know, school.
Can
signs.
we start with the state bylaws on this point of the contents, how frequently they change? Like, kind of look at what the state has regulation.
We can take a look at that. I'm not sure how helpful that's going to be. But we can take a look at that when we can take a look at other towns.
Other
I know,
towns. Yeah.
I know Stoneham adopted, electronic message signs probably about 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago now, and they were they did a lot of research on that, and I'm sure other towns have started to go in this direction. I've also worked with towns that adapted language for that, which said they're prohibited, period. So, you know, towns are all over the spectrum as to how they allow it, whether they allow it, etc. So I can put together some information for the committee. And, you know, maybe pose some questions to try to start shaping what you might want. I mean, Joe, did you use any kind of criteria for like how big, how tall, how bright, or anything like that?
We were following along with the original sign that came in, the first one that the town put up, that town allowed to go up. So basically they were keeping along with the same guidelines. Even with the number of visual changes per amount of time.
And we just put together CPC fund for a electronic sign at Middlesex and Kendall on the property of the old parish meeting house, first parish meeting house. And I don't know exactly how big that is. Colin, you might recall it offhand. I don't, but so we're gonna have one there, and I'm not sure exactly, you know, whether that can have video or it's just gonna be a changing sign. My understanding was it was gonna change frequently. Is that correct, Colin?
Yeah, there'll be no video, no flashing images. It'll be like just a text screen, and it will be only as large. We haven't actually purchased the sign yet. It will only be as large as it's allowed under the bylaw.
But do we have any size restrictions for that yet? Joe, do you know? I mean, if we're just basing it off of the other one,
No, we did that because that falls under the digital signage that we just passed, because that covered municipal and educational use.
Yep.
We just said we're not dealing with commercial because we knew what fun it would be.
yeah. And is that on the spreadsheet that you put together, Bob?
The language that's in the current bylaw is not in the spreadsheet. It is, you have other sections related to signs that you could put some of them into the table, but I thought the electric message signs has a lot of text and standards and requirements, and it's a standalone section, and since that was a new section, I was proposing to leave it as a standalone text section. Maybe we could add it into the table, maybe at the end of the table or somewhere in the table. If that would be a preference, we could do that as well.
Well, it would certainly be considered a permanent sign, right?
Yes.
So we would want to put it in with permanent signs and not. When you said the end of the section, I want to make
Well,
sure.
yeah, I'm sorry, you're right. You have to put it in a logical place, and permanent
Right.
signs would be the logical place.
Okay, all right.
Okay. it would, if I could ask, it would be very helpful to me if I could somehow get copies of the zoning board decisions on however many electronic message commercial signs you've approved, just so I could see what the signs are and what was proposed and what the board approved or what conditions you put in, because that would give me some great direction, I think.
Yep, we can do that.
Pam put that together for you, Joe?
Yeah, I'll talk to Pam.
Okay.
Thanks. So, yeah, so freestanding sign on a lot, then you have freestanding sign for the retail complex of 50,000 square feet. Again, that's only in the B3 and B4 district. The mall sign is only in the B3, B4 district, which makes sense. Those are for big projects.
That's 150,000 square feet, right? That should be a
Yeah.
comma in there, not a
Yeah.
period.
Right there. right
Yeah.
in the top. And then the next category, we've already mentioned this a little bit, is the multiple business signs. With some questions about if you have a lot of businesses, how much of the wall area can you cover? Or how big can the freestanding sign be? And, we need to, come up with some recommendations to limit those two factors. So I'll draft up something for your consideration at the next meeting.
Okay, good.
And then you get to the permanent signs internally lit window sign, where it actually does say one per business or occupant. I think this is, again, perhaps the question here is, supposing you have 6 businesses, and they each get 6 square feet, which is just hypothetical here, and that's 36 square feet, and the window is 38 square feet. It would cover almost all the window. Do you want to have some percentage of window coverage limit within the context of this category?
Well, would that depend on how many businesses are in there or?
Well, it could.
I think this is more of an aesthetic question. I've seen these bylaws before, and you just don't want the package store look where the entire glass is covered.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about, I'm kind of off the top of my head here as I'm thinking about this, but, if the 6 square feet is per window of that occupant, then that's less of an issue, because if they only each get 6 square feet on their own window, then, that's all they get, and that's not gonna be a big percentage coverage of a window.
So would it be better off if we did a percentage of the window? Rather than I mean, what if it's a 6 square foot window? The whole thing's gonna be signed?
Well, it could be, but,
Which brings me back to the percentage of the,
I
of
mean,
the,
if the 6 square foot window is only 3 by 2, so that's kind of an unusual commercial window.
well, I know it's not. I realize that, but I mean, it could be an 8 by 3 and you've got a 6 foot square.
Yeah, I mean, there's no, it's kind of hard, because you think about the percentages, if you said 30% of the window and you had a 6 square foot window, that's, what is it? Just under 2 feet of the window. But if you had a 100 square foot window, that's 30 square feet. So you know, you might have really big signs for one business and really small signs for another business, and maybe that's okay, but the percentage,
Yeah.
you know. I mean, has this been a problem? Has this been an issue? I guess that's one of my questions for a lot of these things. If they aren't problems, they aren't issues, and people aren't complaining, sometimes it's just well enough to leave it alone.
Yeah, I think that one's fine.
Colin, I think Jeremy's trying to get in. Do you see him and can you promote him?
He is coming in as a panelist.
Yeah, it says I'm in a meeting now. Sorry for being late. Do I need to be promoted? Is message to me.
He should be in as a panelist now.
Thank you all. I'm here.
Okay, there we go.
Sorry about my tardiness.
Welcome to the meeting, Jeremy.
Been watching along for the last 20, so I understand what's going on.
So, moving on, then the next permanent signs are open and holiday decorative flag signs. Again, this specifically says one per business, 12 square feet. Not much in the way of, there's no maximum height or location or standards, and not even a permit required, unless it's an advertising flag. So, again, if this has been working and hasn't been a problem, then it's pretty minor type of a sign, but that's up to the town.
Yeah, I don't have much of a comment on that unless you wanted to split it into different sections. But it's all together now, right?
It's all together in the text now. If we split it into two sections, then you're gonna duplicate all this language twice. And
Well, where it's under permanent. I mean, an open sign, obviously, I would consider that to be a permanent sign. But a holiday sign, a holiday flag,
oh, okay,
I don't consider that to be a permanent sign.
I see. Well,
Like
that could
the
be
rest of the world.
temporary.
Yeah,
That could be moved to temporary.
which is, I think, where it should belong, but that's up to anybody else have any comments on that? Joe, Adriana, you're the ones who see this stuff. Well, maybe it never comes up, I don't know.
Yeah, I know I've never seen that come up.
I think that's more of an aesthetic ask of what the town wants, you know, the temporary versus sandwich boards in the front of shopping plazas and holiday signs.
Okay, well, we can,
So leave as is.
I guess.
Okay. And then, the permanent signs, office industrial park development, basically, and, in here, you have,
Is there a reason that's prohibited from B1?
I didn't look,
Just
but
because it says office industrial development.
I was gonna check this and I didn't have a chance to check it, but is this a use that's not even allowed in the B1?
Well, I guess because it says office industrial. Maybe it's focused only on that and not in B1.
That's my guess, but
I mean, it's somewhat the same as the very first one we looked at, the attached sign.
This is yeah, this is a subdivision identification sign. That's like identifying an industrial area as you're going into it. It's not a particular sign for a business, right?
Okay, all right, I see what you're getting at. Yep, okay.
Yep.
okay, and then you get to the temporary signs and you have the unlighted window sign and then the unlighted real estate sign. Those are the two categories.
Yeah, I have no problem with the unlighted window sign. And I'm good with the last one too. Anybody else have any comments? All right. Now you had some specific questions you wanted to go over, Bob?
Yeah, so on the memo, I just need to check one thing here for a second. If you could bear with me for 1 second. Let's see. Okay. Yep, all right. So let's see, so if we could run down these, some of these we've talked about.
Yep.
So the first one is the inconsistent language oriented to the primary street, which it has access, and then oriented to the primary street and which it has frontage. I don't know if that was intentional or just if those languages got adopted at different times and people didn't really compare the old language with the new language and a different word got used or some other reason. But it is confusing because, as I said, they can be two different things, and I don't think it's meant to be two different things. I think probably the town intended this to be consistent. But if anybody knows the history,
So you had suggested putting the word "or" in there.
that would cover you if you want to allow either a sign facing the frontage of the street, the frontage of the property, or the sign could face where they get access, which in most cases is going to be the frontage. But in some limited cases, it would be something different, in which case the property owner might want to actually have the sign on the frontage facing the main street, even though they might, you know, I don't know, go through a driveway in the back of the property or something. I don't know.
So Joe and Adriana, I don't know how you feel about this, but let's take Tavern in the Square for an example. I mean, I'm sure they would love to have a sign on Middlesex as well as a sign that when you pull into the parking lot, you can see exactly where that building is too.
They do.
And they've gotten around that, but it could be any business that's doing that. I mean, they gotten
Yes.
around it with that wallpaper sign on the Middlesex, which questionable in my mind, but they did it and no one seemed to care about it. But I think I would like, as long as we're looking at the signage and we're changing things, in a situation like that, I'd like to see 2 signs on that building just to help promote that business.
And that's what we did. That's what we did.
But
And
you
the
have to do that,
previous
it's
tenant
not
had
by
the
right,
same.
and I'd like to see it done by right, rather than have to go before you guys to get the permission to do that.
Okay.
I don't know how you feel about that, and that's why I'm asking.
I thought it was, the correct thing to do. The prior business had that, so it was sort of a legacy
Yeah,
type of situation, number one. Number two, yes, they are on 2 thoroughfares. One is a main and one is a secondary, one is a private way or whatever, but it's a main thoroughfare through the development. And so, it made sense. So when it did come before the board, I think it was unanimous. I don't think there was any kind of, ill-conceived notion. Making it a right, for under certain conditions, yeah, I could probably see that also to streamline things.
I think it would
Yeah,
just
I
be one of
understand.
those, oh, sorry, Adriana, go ahead.
I agree the same, and I think or is a good solution, because we can't contemplate everything under the bylaw. So an access may be a frontage and a frontage may be an access, and those things might change with time, so.
And in
Yeah, I
that
mean,
case, putting in the word or, I think is fine.
Yeah, I think the word or having multiple signs by right with people that have that, that's where, I mean, I think the zoning board of appeals does a really good job of assessing the situation and determining, when it makes sense. Rather than having it by right, because I mean, then you're gonna have everybody who's in one of those situations saying, oh, I want one here and I want one here. And I don't know if that's really where we want to go.
okay.
And I don't know all the situations. I just look at it and say, where do we hear people having concerns? I think in the situation at Tavern in the Square, they went in front of the zoning board of appeals. It got addressed. It wasn't anything that was difficult. I think the ZBA is easy to work with, and that's what they do. So I would really want to hear everybody's opinion as to if it were by right that they could have multiple signs in those situations, whether we, have a little bit more of a proliferation of signs.
Bob, can you look around at other towns and see what they do in those types of situations? Are they
I
all-
could, but if someone could give me a concise description of exactly what those type of situations are.
So what it is it's a plaza.
Uh,
And one
I
of the business,
I have the
Okay.
drawing, I believe, of the signs. I can, send you the, Google Earth or actually photographs of what we have on that particular building, showing the layout and the proximity to the roads. So
So
I'll send you that information along,
okay.
yeah.
So
along
it's
with-
a situation where the part of the building faces a major road and part of the building faces the major,
Those entranceway to the plaza. So it's
entranceway into the
drive.
property across some parking spaces or something like that.
Yeah. It's a divided, roadway,
Yeah.
2
Okay.
lanes in each direction.
Was there a previous precedent set of why we did this in the zoning before? I'm just curious. I don't know the history of why this was implemented in the zoning before. I don't know if Joe or Andrea, if you know why it was
You mean the
put in there.
previous tenant had two signs, or?
No, yeah, exactly. Like why we put the put it in place that you have to have only one primary, or like you can't do two different ones.
Well, normally you're dealing with just the front of a building, and so you're only going to have one sign on that one frontage of the building. So we want to limit the number of signs. Let's say you've got, we run the gamut of one building, one wall with multiple businesses. They have
Yeah, like
one entrance, but they have multiple licenses for products that they sell. So how do you manage that? How do you, as a condition of their having a business license, they have to have some sort of a signage on the building per their contract. So to allow them to conduct their business, they had to have a certain amount of signage. So that was a special case. So you're only going to be dealing with a number of signs on the frontage of a building on a building that could have been subdivided. On this case, you have one building, one business, but you have two angles of approach. Somebody's got their speakers turned up. I'm hearing reverb. So you have two methods of approach, one from the main entrance on the parking lot side and one on the main thoroughfare side. So in order to have enough advertisement on that corner lot, which is right up against Middlesex, the original petitioner petitioned to have an extra sign lit so that they were duplicated. And that was granted many years ago. And now the new business came in and would like to have the same approach to their signage as the original business. And so that was granted. Again, that was a no-brainer. That was very easy to do. It made a lot of sense.
thanks for that explanation, Joe. And I guess I'll throw another scenario at you.
But for instance, there's one other scenario that we had.
Yeah.
So another person, their building was set back quite a ways, and they wanted to have I'm just going to say a dual angled sign. So basically two signs on the front of their building, but it was on one facade. So now they didn't qualify for that. They qualified for the flat sign up against the building, but their case stated that they wanted to actually have another sign on the side, which is on a private drive. That ended up attempting to go into litigation until the signage bylaws were changed recently for that particular case. So we ended up acquiescing, as I should say, the town ended up saying, yeah, we're going to allow on their entrance side of their parking lot or the main entrance, but still allow them to have a sign towards Middlesex. Okay, so now they're going to have two signs, but they're not on a corner lot. They don't have two main thoroughfares. They have one main thoroughfare and one is on the parking lot. And so that was granted under legal duress. Sometimes signage gets very, very heated, just like the granite countertop business that was on Middlesex. That was heated discussions.
And you guys have a very intimate knowledge of knowing all this, so I'm just curious of another scenario. Like, let's say you have a business that's located where you have Middlesex, or you have Route 3 on one side, and then you have a main thoroughfare on the other side, and that back alleyway, they want a signage similar to like what happens at like Drum Hill, where that plaza, they want signage on the back of their plaza. You know, is that, I get why they want it. They want to advertise their business to that being the main thoroughfare, which is actually in the back. So is that, I'm just curious if that plays into this decision of how we want to word this.
It probably would, because if you made that by right, by permit only, they would probably want to do something like that. If it's something that they're only allowed one on their main facade, sort of like, you may be talking like AMC. The theater, they just have the one sign on the front of the building as you enter the building, but they don't have anything on the backside facing the ramp or facing Route 3. So yeah, that would come into play. And exactly what Selectman Aldridge was saying was you may open up a lot more signage without peer review, board peer review.
I think it should be allowed by permit, maybe not allowed by right, because some of these signage bylaws prohibits us from granting a second sign altogether. So we would have, so I'm thinking of Joe, that cold storage facility they're trying to put in. That's gonna have frontage both on Middlesex and on Route 3. That'd be a perfect example of two signs or multiple signs.
Well, that's something that we, or the board or the townspeople may not want to have that change. They may want to keep our current zoning in that particular case the same. So you'd have to go before the board.
Could I ask a question? The current bylaw has language in it that in just the B3 district and the I1 district, the ZBA can issue a special permit for one additional attached sign and up to 30% increase in the maximum square footage besides what is already allowed. Are these districts you're talking about, these properties in the B3 and I1, or are you granting variances in the other districts for signs?
They were variances in other districts.
Does that present any problems to the zoning board trying to
Yes.
do the test of, hardship and, topography and all of those things?
Yes, that's why we're here and that we're trying to clarify this and make sure that we have a firm standard. We have no problem hearing cases. We have no problem dealing with hardships. It becomes difficult when we're tasked with dealing with square footage, setbacks, soil composition, and topography, and now we have to deal with signs. So that's really not our top three cases for dealing with zoning, right? But it does come under the zoning board of appeals approval process because it's part of the zoning bylaws. So we have to go case by case, and we don't get all that many of them. It isn't like we're getting signs every month or every 6 months or 9 months, right? It's basically to be honest with you, it's trying to in keeping with what we currently have in town, right? To keep the character of the town, to not have proliferation of electronic signs on the highway, to not have a lot of electronic signs on Middlesex or multiple signs. It's good to have some control and regulation that's fair for everyone, that everyone can abide by. If they have a particular property that is on 2 main thoroughfares, yeah, we can deal with that. We can help them out with that and grant them some relief. If someone wants to have the biggest sign on Middlesex and I'm going to flaunt my sign, it's going to be electronic and I'm going to make the largest sign that there is in Tyngsborough just because I'm going to say I have the largest sign. Yeah, we don't want that. If I'm going to make a sign and I'm going to have projector lamps on it, they're going to shine into a neighborhood up until 11 o'clock midnight. That's not going to work. And we have had instances where that was a major concern.
Thank you.
This goes back to the Seinfeld episode with Kramer.
Yeah,
and
the
they did
chicken sign?
The
the
blanket
the
line.
Kentucky Fried Kenny Rogers chicken sign
chicken,
was
yeah.
keeping them up all night. Yeah, yeah. Everything is a Seinfeld episode.
Bob, as I look at these, where it says permit requirements. There's a couple of them that are blank. Should we try and fill those in somehow?
I think that'd be a good idea.
So,
I'm
yeah,
sorry, what was that, Chaz?
so for example, in permanent signs, freestanding sign. It says permit requirements and it's blank. I mean, it's only in the industrial, but I'd like to see something filled in on all of those.
Well,
Freestanding
that's,
sign on
yeah,
page.
that's one of the comments on my memo.
Okay, okay, yeah, I didn't need to get ahead of that. So
Yes. it
why don't we
seems
just
like-
go, let's
it-
go through the memo and the questions and
Yeah,
in order and then
yeah,
we'll,
if we do it in order, then I can keep track of things.
okay.
It makes it a little easier for me, so,
So we,
okay, so,
so we're on number 2 then?
2, this is, yeah. Specifically classified. I have no idea what that meant. Eric had no idea what that meant, and he had no idea what an example of a sign would be that was specifically classified. So, can anybody illuminate this phrase?
Yeah, I got a
I was
question.
just writing something down. What was the question?
Number 2 on the list, Joe, in the memo, there's language about signs permitted in the residential districts are also permitted in the business districts and the industrial district unless specifically classified in the individual business districts. What does specifically classified mean, and what would be an example of a specifically classified sign?
Now, see, that's a good example of where we need clarification. We need this language cleaned up because that one escapes me. I can't. I don't know.
Yeah, I would strike it altogether. If the common reading of it is not understandable to somebody who's been on the board like Joe for years.
Yes.
Nobody's ever called that.
This is always our recommendation. If nobody knows what it means in town hall, nobody outside, the average citizen or the business people are gonna know what it means, so it really should be deleted under those circumstances, but that's a decision for all of you.
I think let's delete that.
Okay. We talked about this a little bit. The business district, the B2 district has, is the only district that doesn't have a ZBA provision to increase the size and the height. And I pointed out, you talked about the town center B2 district and the other B2 district about maybe having 2 different provisions, but that would be contrary to state legislation, so. If you wanna add something here, I would need some direction in terms of, well, okay, what can the ZBA allow? Would it allow exactly the same what it allows for in the B1 and B3 and B4? Or do you want something lesser?
Well, I thought we discussed that it couldn't be separated. It would have to be, we couldn't have a town center
Right,
and then everything else.
right.
So I think if we leave it blank, it needs a permit. So it's gonna go before the ZBA anyway, because that does say under permit requirements, signed permit. And it could be dealt with individually at that point. So I think we leave that one alone.
Yep, I agree.
But do we allow for an increase in the square footage? So we have some discretion.
I think the
for
original
your
intent
oddball
was.
cases.
I think the original intent was to hold that firm. So I would leave that the same.
Yep.
Okay, the business open holiday flag sign, I mentioned this quickly before, there are no height or location requirements or limitations and no standards, but I think someone said that the town didn't seem to be having any problems with these signs anyway, so, if that's
Yep. Let's
people
leave
are
it.
okay leaving it the way it is, because it seems to be working, then, don't make more work where you don't need it. But if it's a concern, then it needs to be addressed.
Well, I think we decided to leave that alone, so we will.
Okay. Number 5, we talked a little bit about this, and I think we came to the same conclusion to leave it as is because it, but, people should check their memory against mine, so.
And then we have the unlighted real estate sign.
You have a percentage of how much can be covered, so that seems to have worked. If you haven't had any problems or complaints.
All right, number 7, attached signs.
Number 6, same thing, unlighted real estate sign, no height or location. Requirements for the unlighted real estate signs, is that a concern to the tenant?
I don't think we've really had a problem with that, but if you wanted to put in a maximum height of, several feet, maybe 6 feet, and location, within a certain number of feet of the front of the building or main entrance to the building.
Just as a comment on, the maximum height, I do think that that's a loophole, not having any height. I mean, somebody could, think about this, somebody could put a 25 square foot sign on a 100-foot tall pole. Do you want that to happen?
No, that's why I was saying, I think we should have some limitations on that.
And your signs throughout town have an 8-foot, freestanding signs have
yeah.
an 8-foot height limit. Why not put that here?
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah, I would say 8 foot, and then you said there was a location requirement, so within a certain number of feet of the front of the building or the main entrance to the building, 100 feet or something like that.
So the issue about, certain distance from the building,
Oh, I see what you're saying. Maybe, no, let's say minimum, 10 feet into the property line then.
yeah,
Let's say-
because these are the
let's-
signs. that
Let's
are
say
gonna
it's a
be
treed
like,
lot. Yeah, there was no building or anything like that.
No
so-
building yet,
Yeah.
this lot for sale or whatever,
Mhm.
So is that acceptable? At least 10 feet back from the property line, the street
Sure.
line?
Yeah.
Okay. And, um, 7, let's see. Oh, I think we clarified this is 1 per business, not 1 per building when there's 3 or 4 businesses, so 1 per business. Okay. Number 8, let's see if we can. Well, just a comment. This is one of those things you notice when you put things in tables. Some of the signs have language requiring a permit. Some of those, I think we actually addressed this now, I'm thinking about it. Some have specifically exempt and some were blank, but you just picked up on that and said we should put in sign permit required where it was blank. Okay. All right, well, that's through the first run through the table, and I'll run through the comments. I think we've addressed all the comments. That's a big help. And so there's a lot more work, obviously, now. You've added some things. You want to add EMC signs, and you've added some other things that I need to draft up, and I need to do some more research on some of the questions you've asked, and you need to get me some information that you're gonna get.
So I'm gonna get you information on dual adjacent signs as an example, tavern on the square. And
Right.
information on the signs and the proximity to thoroughfares. And then you're gonna get some example on electronic billboards from, for instance, Stoneham, Massachusetts. And I'm gonna give you the 2 cases, order of conditions of the current electronic billboards that we have.
Yeah, that would be very helpful. Okay. So I'll come back with another draft in June. I will have more questions for you, I'm sure. And I hope you have more answers for me as well. But we made a lot of progress tonight, so I appreciate it.
So currently your point of contact then is Colin, correct?
Yep.
Yes,
Okay. So he can send out whatever material and questions you have ahead of time to us so that we have a chance to go over them and come up with some answers and so forth. So that would be terrific. Bob, thank you so much for all your hard work you put into this site. This looks like a labor of love to me, so.
it starts out as a labor of love. Well, sometimes with some towns, it ends up not quite there anymore. But
Well, I appreciate you
we're
taking.
doing
this
good
time.
so far.
Yes, indeed. All right, so next on, we have discussed next steps and future discussion items. Anyone have any thoughts on what we could be working on going forward? I know I've got one at least. And the one that I have has to do with parking. And it's 7.1 F, and it's a table of what's allowed and what isn't allowed. And in the very first one, let's see here if I can find this quickly. It has to do with stores, retail, business, and services. It says 1 space per 200 square feet or of gross leasable area, or a minimum of at least 3 spaces per establishment.
Mhm.
I think 3 spaces is not enough. And in fact, I would like to just see that whole second part of it, that it allows the 3 spaces, just remove that from our bylaws altogether. Any business that I've ever been or ever worked for has at least 1 employee working there, and most often 2, just to make sure that everything is covered, which allows you just 1 customer in the store at a time. If in fact that business is, say, a hairdresser, you've got 3 seats, you've got 3 hairdressers, you've got 3 customers. It's usually done on you call in and sign up for a time, so you could have 9 parking spots taken up for 1 business at any given moment. We do have restaurants which kind of fall under the same category, which is done by 1 parking spot for 3 seats. However, that doesn't include wait staff or people in the kitchen. I just see that 3 spaces, minimum of 3 spaces, doesn't work for any business I've ever been in or ever worked for. So, like I said, I'd like to just have that taken right out of there, and that's my thoughts on that. So I don't know how the rest of the board feels or how Colin feels or whatever, but that's something I'd like to see taken off. Do you see that?
Most
Go ahead.
most communities we work with are actually trying to figure out how to scale back their parking requirements. That's almost everything we're asked to do, is to look at parking requirements and figure out, well, what do you really need for certain types of uses, and then where is it excessive? For environmental reasons and others.
Okay.
So I want to look at the whole parking schedule, because I don't remember it. I don't have it open in front of me, but I can easily see a situation where a very small establishment may only need 3 parking spaces. And if they're in a plaza or a store, a building with multiple other tenants, it may be fine. I'm not advocating for keeping it. I'm just saying that standard itself doesn't trouble me. But speaking for me as a planner, I don't know, how the rest of you feel.
Joe, Adriana, any thoughts? Jeremy, Eric?
Well, I'll just kind of piggyback off of Judy's response, because that is kind of what I've been seeing typically over the last few years, is that communities are tailoring back their parking requirements, rather than, like, I guess if you want to just look at multifamily development, are two parking spots per unit requirement. Some communities are putting it in a place where, okay, maybe a studio and a one bedroom is a one parking spot per unit, but then when you get to 2 and 3 bedroom units, you're at 2 spots per unit. So people are tailoring that back rather than the 2 to 1. It's, I've seen a lot of waivers being given to give more leeway on less parking requirements. And I guess if there's a precedent in place in Tyngsborough where we are seeing an influx of parking that being an issue, and I guess one situation would be where maybe the marijuana dispensaries, that is a parking issue because it's just a popular thing right now. That could be an issue, but for the other ones, I'm just curious if there's an area where this is really an issue, where we need to actually increase our parking quantities. Because I mean, if you look at it from a sustainability standpoint, requiring more parking, that means that you're requiring more area for impervious soils, and now you're getting into an issue with Concom, with all the
Yep.
issues there, and stormwater control, and the influx of water going off site. I mean, I don't know.
Agreed.
I'm
Agreed.
kind of mixed on this one.
Okay.
That's a lot of what we see is the concern about stormwater and environmental protection from excessive impervious cover.
Okay.
Yeah. So related to this comment, one thing that I have been working with communities literally for decades, and I did this way back in Amherst, and Judy's heard this a lot, and it relates to Jeremy and Judy were just saying. It's you need to understand that the actual demand for parking is not linear. So the demand, so you have 200 square feet of gross leasable, one space for two. So that might be reasonable for smaller stores, 5,000 square foot store, 2,000 square foot store, 10,000 square foot. But once you start getting into the 20,000 plus, the actual demand for parking does not require one space for every 200 square feet. So you're still ending up with unused asphalt. It's wasted space. And when you get up to 50 or 100,000 square foot commercial centers, you end up with vast amount of lonely asphalt that never gets used, but it creates heat islands, it creates more runoff. And so what I have encouraged towns to do, and we did this in Amherst probably almost 30 years ago, and we had a number of shopping centers built after it, and we saw the benefit of it because we had shopping centers with all this excess parking, and then we had shopping centers with more reasonable parking, was to have a tiered system. 200 spaces, 200, I mean, one space for every 200 square feet up to whatever, 8,000 square feet. Then one space for every 350 square feet or something like that, up to 20,000. And then one space for every 500 square feet over 25,000, something like that. Because that's how parking works. It is not a linear system. The parking demand kind of starts plateauing the bigger the business space. So it's another way to think about parking, to have tiered, and that's try to, you don't want to drive around any town and how much empty asphalt do you see in parking lots. So you don't want to encourage anymore.
The mall. We came up across this in some of the 40B permitting, the electric parking spaces. So theoretically, a car would use 2 spaces in a parking lot. they'd have their car charging and then they would move the car somewhere else to allow the next person to charge. So we should anticipate that new parking lots or refurb parking lots are going to have spaces for electric car charging, just like in front of the Tavern on the Square, which surprisingly are filled quite often. So how do you factor that into your tiered system? And I agree, it is not linear and it's based on demand and, you know, averages. One business may need one parking spot, another may need 5. So
That's a great question, Adriana, and there really isn't much that I've seen in terms of good answers, partly for a couple of reasons. One is people who are going to shopping centers to plug their car in aren't necessarily going to the shopping center
That's right.
because it's the only plug-in place in town.
Yep.
Now, eventually you think, well, there'll be more places to plug in, which would mean those people wouldn't be going to the shopping center to plug in. They'd be either plugging in at home or plugging in on street parking or, you know, the neighborhood plug-in place. And then other people, and it's hard to believe people behave this way, but they put their car at the electric thing and they plug in and then they do all their shopping, even though the car is already charged up. They don't move it until they come back after shopping and leave. And, you know, that means people who need the space can't get it. That's a pretty common complaint you hear. So you're right. There are issues here. They're kind of fuzzy and gray at the moment because of this transition from somewhat of a transition from gas to electric. But it's something we need to think about. We all need to think about.
So the high-speed charging in our town is at the mall and is the Tesla charging stations. And those are the ones that I see actually in demand. The ones that the town have at the old town hall and at town hall that typically aren't taken. So there is a demand for that connection between the shopping and high-speed charging. So those classified as spots? Do they count in the count for number of parking spots, or they should be an excluded item? Just how are other towns, like how are the Cambridges and Medfords of the world handling this?
So in
Well,
Cambridge, I can tell you it is included as part of the parking requirement. It's not in addition to. And Andover just wrestled with this at their town meeting. They just did a comprehensive overhaul of all their parking standards. So we can kind of bring you some of the wisdom that came out of that. But there's a management issue for parking that's changing because of the charging stations versus demand for, quote, a regular parking space. So, you know, I kind of agree with Bob in a way. This is sort of like an evolving thing. And the answers to your questions are probably going to change some with more experience.
Yeah, we don't often change our bylaws though. So
I understand, but I mean, the experience you're looking for, I'm not sure exists in the quantity that you would want it to.
What for a town of our size, we do have, and I don't know how the other board members feel, we have a lot of electric charging stations around town. And we have 2 high speed, and then we have a couple of the regular chargers. So you can kind of see how they're being used. So you know, we're different from Cambridge. Maybe we're more on par with Medford as a residential community.
Are the 2 communities that you mentioned, are they stretch communities or are they not? They are both, Jeremy?
Well, if I could just weigh in on the energy code requirements, because a lot of the energy codes are changing pretty rapidly, and right now there are requirements in the stretch communities and special opt-in communities for EV charging and EV ready already. So it's like, how much do we really want to dive into this and have requirements when those codes are really the driving force right now?
Right.
Do we want to let that lead the EV ready? You know, if you look at something like Worcester, they require, I think, 20% of their parking spots to be EV ready. And that's like, so those parking spots are stubbed. But if we start inserting language then it gets confusing because we're gonna be conflicting, we could be conflicting with the energy code requirements right now.
Okay,
I don't disagree with that. My question is should those spots be included or excluded from what, so if somebody came to us, would they have their allotment of 10 and that's what they could build, but they also have another 5 allotted for electric and that doesn't count against them in their parking?
all right, well, like I said, I was thinking parking might be something we would want to discuss. It seems to be evolving at a point that maybe we ought to wait and see what happens before we move on to that topic. Any other topics in our bylaws that anybody else would like to take a quick look at before we get to town meeting in the fall?
Guys, I would just mention that in the email Eric sent to you, I think it was his last email he sent to you, he mentioned definitions. And he mentioned it to me in my last phone call with him. He thought there were that kind of had been on one of the lists of things to do for updating the bylaw, and he thought there were some definitions that could be fixed or some definitions missing that could be added. And
Okay,
so he was just throwing that out there as a possible topic as well.
okay,
And that's probably realistic within the scope that we have left too. I mean, I think the parking issue is a big conversation, having just gone through this in another town. But I think definitions we can tackle.
okay. Did Eric have any specific ones that he was concerned about, Bob? Or just in general?
I don't, off the top of my head, I don't remember him mentioning anything, but I'll have to go back to my notes and also maybe just his email to you. I don't know if he mentioned anything
Yeah.
specific in that email.
I'll go back and look at that email then. Okay, well, definition sounds like a bit of a challenge too, so,
It always is.
yeah. All right, well, we'll all get together on June the 11th would be our next scheduled meeting, if that works for everyone. And
Okay.
with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Do I have a-
Second,
Motion to,
Jeremy, did you second?
yes, second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
All right, thank you, everyone. We will see
Aye.
you on the 11th of June.